When Joe Biden went to Penn, Communist China paid millions of dollars to fund what he was doing. Communist China, we also know, paid Hunter Biden and the Biden family millions of dollars. And so there's a long history of Communist China writing checks. The fact that University of Delaware is trying to keep these documents secret, in fact, it said it's not going to release any of them until 2 years after Biden leaves public office, I think that's unacceptable.
And that was Senator Ted Cruz with me last week on this program on the University of Delaware refusing to release any of the 1,850 boxes of documents from President Biden as questions swirl over Communist China's infiltration of American universities and Biden's gross negligence in handling the nation's most sensitive secrets. This after we learned Communist China donated some $60 million to the University of Pennsylvania to create the Penn Biden Center, where classified documents were also stored. Biden placed several Penn leaders into key positions in his administration. Afterwards, former Penn Biden Center Director Anthony Blinken was named Secretary of State. Former university president Amy Gutmann is now the ambassador to Germany. And former chairman of the Penn board, David Cohen, is now the ambassador to Canada. The University of Pennsylvania was also able to successfully lobby Joe Biden to shut down the so-called China Initiative, which was investigating China's surveillance and its intellectual property theft. Joining me right now with a look at the Chinese Communist Party's effort to infiltrate America, including the surveillance balloon the CCP sent to breach America's sovereignty, the former director of national intelligence, once the top spy in America, John Ratcliffe. John, it's great to see you this morning. Thank you so much for being here. I want to start off and get your take on this week and this spy balloon. How do you see things?
Well, good morning, Maria. It's pretty easy and pretty clear. It should be to all Americans. This past week, unfortunately, the People's Republic of China executed an incredibly successful intelligence operation over the mainland of the United States. And conversely, the Biden administration committed an unprecedented national security blunder of incalculable damage. And I say that, Maria, because we know, the facts are very clear that America's number one adversary, the People's Republic of China, maneuvered a spy craft into U.S. airspace a week ago on Saturday, January 28th, and it didn't leave U.S. airspace until a week later, Saturday, February 4th. And except for the time that it was over Canada, it spent at least 4 days, at least 100 hours continuously over the continental of the United States in an intelligence operation, again, of incalculable damage, violating U.S. sovereignty of our airspace and our territorial borders in an unprecedented way that I'm not aware has ever happened in our history, Maria, and the Biden administration let that happen.
I want to ask you about that. It never happened in our history. But first, let me get your take on first China lying about what it was. They said it was a civilian airship. We both have spoken about China a long time. There's no civilian airship that can collect data, right?
Right. So military civil fusion laws mean that there is no civilian airship. This was a spy operation. It was deliberate. It was intentional. It was calculated to go over sensitive military sites, nuclear facilities, and critical infrastructure. There was nothing accidental about this. It was a deliberate campaign, and unfortunately, as we just talked about, incredibly successful for the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Republic of China.
I want to get your take on the response and also China's response, and zero in on what you know about potential previous breaches. You've seen more intelligence than anybody other than the president. I'm talking with the former director of national intelligence, John Ratcliffe, and we've got more in just a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back, and I am back with the former DNI, John Ratcliffe. John, the Biden administration is trying to minimize this explosive situation in this past week, and the Department of Defense is claiming that there were 3 balloons, Chinese spy balloons, that entered the United States airspace during the Trump administration, and that they were not shot down and they were not disclosed. Can you please tell us the truth and if that's true?
Well, it's not true. I can refute it. Former Secretary of Defense Mark Esper refuted it yesterday. Former Secretary of State and CIA Director Mike Pompeo has refuted it. But Maria, the American people can refute it for themselves. Do you remember during the Trump administration when photographers on the ground and commercial airline pilots were talking about a spy balloon over the United States that people could look up and see even with the naked eye, and that a media that hated Donald Trump wasn't reporting? I don't remember that either, because it didn't happen. As I said to you earlier, this was unprecedented. We have never had a circumstance where an adversary has had spy craft over our country, our continental United States, posing a threat for the better part of a week straight. And that's why I said to you before, not only is it unprecedented, but the damage from this is incalculable, both from an intelligence standpoint and the possible payloads. You talked a little bit earlier about the different types of payloads that a stratospheric balloon could carry. Those possibilities are limited only by your imagination. But what we do know is none of those are possible to be deployed against the United States if a stratospheric balloon isn't allowed to traipse across our countryside for 4 straight days, something that has never happened before. But beyond that intelligence damage, Maria, the other thing is that the damage that it wasn't just 320 million Americans that were watching this balloon, paralyzed for a week. It was Russia. It was Iran, it was North Korea, it was American adversaries who also were surprised that this type of thing could happen and are frankly thrilled at the possibilities of what they could do to deploy the same type of stratospheric balloon or device over the continental mainland and have this kind of slow, weak, timid, late, frankly, terrible response by the Biden administration.
Well, I want to ask you what kind of capability it has, but just to be clear, you're saying there were not 3 spy balloons from China that entered the United States airspace and traveled and was able to do what we've seen this week?
Yeah, I'm telling you that very clearly. Listen, Maria, it's every time something goes wrong in the Biden administration, there's one of 2 responses. They either find a way to blame the Trump administration, or they try and find a way to say the Trump administration did it too. And that's what they're trying to say here. This happened during the Trump administration. It didn't.
Okay.
And you would have heard about it before.
Let me ask you about the capabilities of this balloon. What do you think it was carrying, the payloads of different things? Was it drones, satellites? And was there an opportunity to drop and scatter devices that could be powered by solar energy, which would give you unlimited surveillance? Back to the CCP.
So great question, Maria. A lot of people have sort of minimized the balloon as an obsolete technology. You have to ask yourself, why would the Chinese then even send obsolete technology over the United States if it wasn't going to provide anything of value, as the Biden administration has tried to tell you? Listen, the truth, without getting into anything classified, is that stratospheric balloons, because of recent technologies, can be maneuverable, can loop around, can hover, and do things that low Earth orbit satellites can't do. We know from public reporting, without getting into anything classified, that China, for at least 6 years, has been successfully deploying payloads, including drones, from stratospheric balloons. And what's publicly known is that the U.S. military and Department of Defense has a number of projects out there involving stratospheric or stratolight balloons and different types of possible payloads that could be deployed, as you talked about, everything from cicada drones to very small electronic listening devices that could run on solar power and transmit data back interminably. All of those things, Maria, are possibilities. I'm not saying that they took place here, but what I'm saying is none of those terrible scenarios would be possible if this had been taken down as it should have been before it crossed into U.S. airspace and remained there for the better part of a week. Really an inexcusable, inexplicable national security blunder.
Well, I mean, look, this is not the first time the national security team has met with their Chinese counterparts a few times, and they've been laughed at, mocked. We had COVID-19, which killed 1 million plus Americans, and we continue to have no questions whatsoever asked of the CCP about the origins of COVID-19, not to mention all of the intellectual property theft and the impact to American companies. Where is this going?
Well, you just barely touched on a very long list of national security concerns and disasters by this national security team that President Biden has in place. I mean, you didn't even touch on a manufactured national security crisis at our southern border, or an unmitigated military disaster in Afghanistan that they were the architects of, or that their sternly worded letters didn't stop Vladimir Putin from invading Ukraine. That's before you even get to the soft on China approach that has been there from day one, not confronting China over 1 million dead Americans from COVID that originated in China, hundreds of thousands of deaths from fentanyl that's coming from China, and now we have a spy balloon that violates our sovereign airspace for almost a week straight. It does lead to the question about this national security team that you asked before, Maria, and you know, there's a long list of incompetence, but there's also a very fair question about whether this national security team is compromised, and I don't think Americans have any confidence in them based on all the things that I just mentioned and more, and I think that we're stuck with President Biden for the next 2 years, but he needs to make some changes to his national security team. They have failed the American people over and over again.
So somebody should be fired.
He needs to make changes.
Thank you so much. John
You
Ratcliffe,
bet.
thank you, sir. We'll be right back.